right. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us today. Hope you're having a great day wherever you are. If you're in Phoenix, hopefully you aren't sweating too bad.
In the shade somewhere.
In this very serious heat. I heard them just on the radio saying there's an excessive heat warning coming to Phoenix. I was like, yeah, it's called the summer.
Yeah, it's called the summer.
What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Excessive.
Yeah.
But yeah, my name is David Stockton, and I'm here with Ryan Romeo,
That's
sitting
right.
on the couch. And then Dalton, as always, is running the controls.
Dalton
We
Davis.
call it the back seat, but he's actually driving, probably.
Yeah. Yeah, he can do whatever he wants. He's got a lot of control back
It's
there.
more like I'm in the passenger seat of like a student driver car, you know, and I like have an extra set of like,
Just
you know,
in case.
pedals and
That's
wheels.
great. Yeah, that's a great way to say
Yeah,
it.
if you could pick the car that we're in right now, which car would you pick?
Ooh.
Me?
Anyone, everyone.
My Scion XB is my favorite car I've ever owned. I'm going to be very sad when it dies. So I like that car. So that's the car I would pick.
Out of all the cars you could pick.
yeah.
What year is it?
It's 2012.
And it's brown.
It's brown and the paint is chipped off.
I
It
know
looks
about the brown.
terrible.
Yeah.
It looks
Because of the
so
excessive
bad.
heat warnings of
It's the excessive heat. It's the people I've run into.
Excessive summers.
It's just poor car ownership. Really.
I'd say for me, the new Tundra is super cool. I love that car.
That's big.
Yeah. And it's a little smaller. Like they like if they kind of shrunk it down a bit. And if the new Tacoma, I feel like it looks a little weird, but the new Tundra looks really cool. They had a lot of room for improvement. It looked weird before, so they did a good job.
Yeah. Those are nice trucks, though. My brother had one of those.
Yeah.
Not the new one, but they're smooth. Very smooth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go for it. I'd be like in the back of a Maybach or something. That's what I was sort of picturing. Dalton's at the controls. Me and you sitting back there, just enjoying the AC.
Yeah.
All kinds of snacks around
I guess
me.
there's like practical car and then impractical. I didn't go all the way impractical.
I've been so poor I couldn't even dream of that nice of a car.
You're like Scion is about as good as it gets.
Yeah, I really love my car.
Yeah.
Like I would buy another one if it died, but they don't exist anymore.
Yeah,
they dissolved the brand.
that is kind of
so,
sad. Yeah,
Scion
they've gone
doesn't
the way.
exist.
One of
a collector's item now. Maybe.
Yeah,
One of the casualties
It
of-
looks like it's taken care of pretty poorly for a collector's item. So
It could use a little elbow grease.
yeah.
Your car has the picture of the at the girl leading the at. Is it still there?
Yeah. We were just talking before we were recording, but I love Star Wars, so it's the girl walking on a leash. AT.
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
You can't call it at.
You can call it an ad
Am I
if
way
you
off
want.
on that?
No, that's fine.
Yeah, I
It's-
didn't know. I've only heard AT, so I don't know. I'm not
Shoot.
sure. But we're
I was trying to
we're
be
not
cool
as deep
and
into
fit
it.
in.
We're not as deep into it as Dalton is. Dalton and Michael, if you get in a conversation about that with them, it gets real dicey.
And Dune.
And Dune, yeah.
Dune. That's more Matt McCartan than anyone, but I like Dune. Dune's fun.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we
have other things to talk
speaking
about.
of Dune and Star Wars and things very wild and imaginatory. We are talking about the book of Ezekiel.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
And luckily, Ryan and I both did a teaching on Ezekiel, so we're pretty brushed up.
Yeah, fairly brushed up.
Ezekiel is one of those puzzles that's like 450 billion pieces to put together.
Yes.
So we don't.
And you're always missing a piece. You're always like, where does this one go? Is this a different puzzle?
Yeah, one of the pieces has like 75 sides. You know? And it's an edge piece too, which is crazy.
It's a wild ride.
So Ezekiel is a lot of pieces, a lot of different visions and visions within visions, and then visions drawing from Daniel's visions or some other apocalyptic vision, but then pulling in tons of history, Israeli history and all of that. And then one of the things I focused on this last week was Ezekiel as the priest. Because Ezekiel wasn't just a prophet. He wasn't just a man of God. Oftentimes you'll have, a little list about the prophets that, one of them was a shepherd and one of this. But Ezekiel was actually of the line of Zadok, which is basically kind of like the high priest lineage at that point in Israel's history. And so he was destined to be, from the day he was born, when his mom and dad found out, hey, we got a boy, they were rejoicing because his path was set. The honor and prestige that he would bring to the family as someone who was able to serve in the actual temple, in the inner courts, all of these things just such a big deal. And so that was Ezekiel. And the reason I focused on that was because Ezekiel has these profound visions of the temple.
Yeah.
And in Ezekiel 8, he is in Babylon as a captive, and he's in a vision of some sort, teleported back to the actual building of the temple in Jerusalem that's still standing at this point.
Yeah.
And God is showing him kind of a other dimensional perspective, or the spiritual realm reality
Caught up in
of
the
what was
spirit.
happening in the natural realm reality, as the priests were interacting there, and there was some Babylonian idolatry being set up in there, and it was kind of like, Ezekiel, I want you to see this through my eyes. So he goes in there and he sees the idol that causes jealousy, which is a funny phrase. And God basically shows him all this wicked thing, stuff that's going on there. There was women worshiping Tammuz, or no, they're weeping for Tammuz. There's 25 men with their backs away from the temple worshiping the sun god. There's all these different things that happen in there, and basically God says, Ezekiel, this is driving me far away.
Yeah.
And so then he sees the glory of the Lord lift and go away from that building there. And that was, the spiritual perspective of God saying, that's it. And then shortly after that, the physical temple in the natural realm is completely
Destroyed.
destroyed, which raised is a funny thing. Like, it's flattened, but it was raised.
Never made sense to me. Yes, but yeah.
So it's burnt, it's destroyed, nothing left, all of that. And so then at the end of that passage, at the end of Ezekiel, God shows him a vision of a new temple. And it's not a temple that is in the natural. It hasn't been built. They did rebuild the temple with Ezra and Nehemiah and Zerubbabel. But this temple was actually some sort of like other dimensional or heavenly temple. And this temple was larger, and it was, all these different things. But the main thing is it was ordered correctly. It didn't have idolatry in it, all these things. And the result was water flowed out of it. And he sees this picture of this, river that's to your ankles, then to your knees, then to your waist. And then it's, you can't even swim. It's so strong and so full. And what it does is it brings healing to all the nations. It actually has trees on either side, and the leaves of the trees are healing for the nations. And so Ezekiel has this hopeful end that God gives him, but again, it's not in reality. And I think when I think of the temple in Ezekiel, when I think of Ezekiel's relationship to that, and God's plan for us as our bodies are His temple, and what He's wanting to do, it kind of changes the dynamic of what that temple was supposed to be. God wasn't just looking for a building. He was doing something. He was building towards something. Israel as a chosen nation isn't because God loves Israel better than everybody else. It's that He's doing something through the nation of Israel that's for all the nations.
Yeah.
And so I think it's interesting because it brings us to today. We have this conflict in Israel right now, Israel and Palestine, and the battle over territory, which is kind of escalated to where now it's not just a battle over territory, but Israel was attacked, and a lot of people died, and so Israel is counterattacking, and a lot of people are dying, and so just wanted to get some of your thoughts on that conflict, and again, my mind's been going there a bunch because of being in Ezekiel.
Yeah, and I think when I was preaching on Ezekiel, I had kind of called back to God's promise to restore the nation of Israel as one unified nation, and how interesting, up until 1948, for Christians to talk about when Israel is one nation, they're like, well, this must be figurative language. Yeah. And I put up a quote from the Encyclopedia Britannica from like 1911 when it was like, the chances of people speaking Hebrew are just as remote as Israel being a country again. Like, it's never going to happen. Yep. And so up until like even right now I'm doing theology school, and they're like, anything before 1950 is a completely different sort of take on things, especially Old Testament wise, than after 1950. So the idea of God giving a promise to the people of Israel and then being true to that promise doesn't mean that Israel's perfect by any means. It shows the perfect nature of God's promises, that he never forgets his promise, no matter what. And to say that Israel is imperfect today is just a continuation of the point of 90% of the Old Testament where you're going, they missed the mark here, they missed the mark here. You know, and there's these moments where maybe King David comes in and there's these glimpses where, the blessing on Israel initially was that so that they could be a blessing. You know, they're blessed to be a blessing to the nations. And Ezekiel is continuing that prophecy of you will be a blessing to the nations.
Yeah.
So I think it's difficult when we come into like a season like this where we're in a kind of complicated, situation in the Middle East. And I think I had an email from someone who was saying like, are you espousing like Christian Zionism? And I'm saying, well, no, I'm not saying Israel's perfect. I'm not saying that what they're doing right now is what they should be doing. It's not a comment on any of that. It's a comment on the faithfulness of God to Israel.
Yeah.
And I think it's a reminder, even pulling it into ourselves personally, like how many times have we been so imperfect, and God is true to his promise to those of us that are imperfect. But, you look at the situation now, Joel, friend of mine, David's cousin, Joel and I were talking, and Joel, he's been working with this guy who does a lot of tours in Israel, and he was actually in Israel in October when all of that stuff went down. And as it came back, he was saying, we got out and it was okay. They were not in that same area. Okay. But they do a lot of like digital tours of Israel to really help people like get in the place where all the things that we study in the Bible happen.
Right.
And Joel was invited to kind of like a private showing of some of the video of October 7th, and it was very intense. And Joel said, I had no idea what I was walking into, and he walked into it, and he said, I was just forever changed. And mostly because you come into contact with such evil, that October 7th was incredibly evil. I mean, the things that were happening and even the videos they were sending back to their parents, and their parents were going, we're so proud of you. It's a thing that we can't really wrap our head around. And Joel, even as he was telling me, he was crying, like as he was recounting just a little bit of it. And I think there is that, when that first happened, there was a real hope and a real season where we're going, gosh, there really hasn't been much going on in Israel. There hasn't really been much happening there. And so this stirring up of that has really brought all of that sort of tension right back to the surface. And it's happened time and time again. I mean, from the inception of Israel in the 1940s, we were talking about the 6-Day War, and, when every nation around Israel decided, hey, we got to take them out, and 6 days later, Israel stood, and it's pretty amazing when you study the history of it. So it's not anything new. It's been happening over and over, and the sad sort of level of, even outside of the conversation of Israel, it's spilled into a real sad sort of anti-Semitism that we see kind of being normalized in culture, and so I do think there's a lot of I think Christians have to learn how to have some brave conversations when it comes to this. I think we kind of tiptoe around it, and there's nuance in all of it. Again, we could say that there's a blessing on Israel, and we can also say that they're, going pretty overboard right now in a lot of ways too. And there's a huge amount of nuance in between even those two comments.
Well, and I think trying to boil it down to say, what do we know? Well, I mean, what's true is that, like you said, God's not through with the Jews. There are promises that are still there, that are for the people of God, for the people of God, for his chosen people. But Ezekiel makes it very clear that what God is doing is not, he's taking our heart of stone and he's going to give us a heart of flesh. And he's going to allow the temple of stone to be destroyed so that we can understand that there's a spiritual temple, like our flesh is the temple. So it's, again, I think we just have to be so careful to not miss what God is doing or to try and make everything, here and now in the natural.
And Ezekiel's life is that. I mean, like what you just said, I mean, he was a priest. Everything in his life was geared toward being in the temple the rest of his life. Then he finds himself in exile. He's taken from his home. And everything up until this point is the location of the temple, the promise of the land, which was a promise of God to give them that land. That is something that's a promise of God. But then God takes them from that land, takes him from the temple, takes him from everything that in Jewish tradition would say, this is how you interact with the presence of God. Yeah. And God meets him there. Yeah. And there is something so interesting where God's even going, I can meet you anywhere. Like I can bring the temple to wherever you're at. Yeah. And there was that inkling, that sort of prophetic inkling of what eventually would be the New Testament paradigm of the temple being in us, that Jesus broke down that barrier, tore the veil in half when he died on the cross so that we can have access to the Holy of Holies. We say these sort of things all the time, but when you look at it in the context of Ezekiel, like that's a pretty miraculous thing. They're like, that would be in you? That's kind of wild,
Yeah.
And I think Ezekiel's life is that sort of, and you could say the same with Daniel. I mean, you could say the same with anybody who's living in exile.
Right? Jacob's ladder, even, he's not in exile, but
he's not on the land.
He goes out on his own, because he's stolen the blessing and all of those things. He's out there, and all of a sudden, he sees these angels coming up and down these ladders, and I forget what I think he named it Bethel, that place where he was, because he said, "The Lord is here, and I was not aware of it." Yeah, and I left home, I left everything I knew, I'm on my own, and yet the Lord is still here, and so I just think it's very cool, and one of the phrases that Ezekiel uses to describe that he senses the Lord with him in captivity, even though he's apart from the temple and all these things, he says, the hand of the Lord was upon me. And then it gets weird because Ezekiel gets weird always, and the hand of the Lord grabs him by the hair and pulls him up between heaven and earth and shows him the vision. But just to not go into the funny, weird part, but like the hand of the Lord was upon him. And I think that's such a special thing, again, because his life, what I'd said on Sunday was, it was shattered and disfigured. All that he had thought, all that he was hoping, his homeland, his vision for life, him as a priest, shattered and disfigured. But the hand of the Lord came upon him. And the hand of the Lord was this blessing. The hand of the Lord was, hey, I'm with you. My presence is with you. And it's sustained, it invigorated, it empowered Ezekiel to be a faithful witness, even in the midst of all, to continue his priestly duties. Even though he's got no temple, he's got none of that stuff that he was trained to do. Now he's got to figure out how to, continue to do the works of God and to care for people and to be a bridge between people and God, even in this captivity. And so he writes these prophecies and he continues to share, and it gets weird, right? He's got weird messages to share.
And I think it's interesting to me where, in a strange way, if you remove the sort of nuancical politics of it or whatever we're in right now, the fact that the world's attention is still on a little area about 10% the size of Arizona, and you're like, why not Siberia or Ghana or Indonesia? Like, there are many, many places around the world.
It's an epicenter for sure, yeah.
For some reason, there is this epicenter for the world's attention that's always in this tiny, tiny part of the world. Yeah. And you can lament it, and it could be sad, and we could pray for the peace of Israel like we should. But it's very interesting just cutting through all of it to like try to pop our head above water a little bit and go, just paying attention to that alone should point to that there's this spiritual dynamic. There's something about that land. There's something about what God did there. There was something about that separates the stories in the Old and New Testament from anything else, and it makes that area incredibly powerful and interesting. And I think that to anybody, even in this secular world, they would have to look at that and go, this doesn't really make sense. Right. Like, you can't blame one politician.
They don't have tons of oil right there.
They don't.
Like, there isn't like this very clear, everyone wants that resource.
Yes.
I mean, most of it was marshland. I mean, until they worked it out and
and
kinda
it's
made it
I mean,
fruitful.
even the story from the 1940s, you know, they purchased a lot of that land, they worked that land, they brought back a dead language, even all of those sort of things. You're going, can we at least take a step back and say there's something very interesting happening there? And even from a secular humanist perspective, it's got to bring up a lot of questions, like why there? Why do we keep coming back to that? If religion is dead and nobody believes in God anymore, like why is that? Does that matter? And I think for those of us that follow Jesus, like we know that there is significance in that land, no matter what.
In some ways, God has chosen Israel to be a point of blessing, and it's like the devil has chosen Israel to be the point at which he's trying to bring curse.
Of cursing.
And if he can destroy Israel, then God's not faithful.
Yeah.
But again, I think there's, like you said, there is the natural Israel and there's the spiritual Israel. Like Ezekiel, the whole Bible is always trying to get us, and God himself saying, hey, I'm not just after, the flesh and blood. I'm after the heart, the heart. And even when it says in Romans, all Israel shall be saved, such a fascinating phrase there. And the work in Romans, 9, 10, and 11, speaking about the Jews in particular and God's future plans for them and all these things. Yeah. It's very interesting. But that all Israel shall be saved. I mean, we know for sure that refers to Israel as the people who have, who believe in God. And again, those who believe God will provide a sacrifice, and those who believed God did provide a sacrifice, kind of Old Testament and New Testament.
Yeah.
But it all pivots on Christ. It all pivots on what he did. But there's some great promises there that God's still drawing. He's still doing these things. And even that phrase I think about a lot. I think it's Zechariah, but it talks about the day of the Lord when we believe Christ returns. And it says that Israel looks up and says, hey, where did you get those wounds? And he says, I got them in the house of my friends. And so it's just like I keep thinking about that day. And at that point, I've heard people talk, and it does seem to make sense that would be a moment where many people who maybe have heard the stories of Jesus but have rejected them because of Judaism, like, no, that's not our Messiah. When they see Jesus and they see the wounds in his hands, like Thomas, the wounds and the love represented by those wounds becomes more powerful than their doubt. Yeah. And so that's, I love that picturing, and I think, God's got a plan. And we should pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We should pray for God's will to happen in Israel. We should pray that Israel would be able to be blessed in the way that God wants them to be, because when Israel's blessed, somehow the blessing reaches all the world. Yeah. We've seen it from time to time. And so I think that's the way we lean in and support Israel. It's not politically we support Israel and everything they do. Yeah. It's we want different. So badly for the people of Israel to experience the fullness God has planned for them, because somehow that benefits all of us. Yeah. And if they don't, that's fine. We still can find the blessing of the Lord. Yes. But that's what God wants us to pray for.
Well, and I think as a follower of Jesus, you could look at Israel and you go, his desire for Israel is that they would turn to him, to Jesus. Yep. Like there is that desire for them. The same when you look at the, Palestinian or Muslim people group in the Middle East. Yep. His desire is that they turn to him. Yep. And what we're seeing is we're seeing the clash of two somewhat politicized sort of religions that are kind of, that you see that tension happening. Yeah. And for sure, Islam is a very politicized, like its goal is to sit in the political realm, which in Christianity, we're like, oh, no, we're trying to communicate that, oh, no, we're not doing that. Yeah. Like maybe we'll bring some Christian values into it. And
that's interesting.
But for Muslims, their highest thing is like, we want Sharia law. Yeah. We want this to be a law over the people. We want to legislate
the righteousness we believe in.
Yes. And so that will always create a clash. And I think that's where the brave conversation comes in, where you go, well, it's just, neither one of those is the way to life. Jesus is the way to life. And the prayer is that they see the fallacy of what keeps happening over and over, that Israel could see her identity to try to be a blessing to the nations and to walk in that.
Yeah.
But without Jesus, it doesn't really happen.
Right.
And you can only go so far with politics. You can only go so far with even religion in that sense of trying to be as good as you can and build things like, hey, God's called us to this land. We're going to work real hard and rebuild it. It's wonderful and it's interesting, and it might even be the fulfillment of prophecy. But at the end of the day, God's heart is that all turn to Him and that all turn to Jesus. And that's the prayer. Like, there will not be peace in the Middle East until people give their life to Jesus. That's the sad reality.
I love what you're saying too, because we should also pray for the peace of Palestine.
Yes.
We should pray for the peace of the people there that want peace. But what it does seem like is there is a blessing that could come to Palestine if Israel has peace.
Yes.
Like maybe that's the frustrating part of it all. Like, you have the older brother. If older brother's good, then I'll be good.
Yes.
And even thinking about Jacob back then, it was like the father would give the blessing to the firstborn, and the firstborn was to make sure everybody else was taken care of.
Yeah.
He wasn't supposed to use all that blessing, all that inheritance just on himself. He was supposed to use it to make sure the whole family's okay.
Yes.
That's why he was given the blessing responsibility.
Yeah.
And so, when what happened, and this is the picture in my mind, was God was pouring out His blessing into Israel in Ezekiel's day, and because of the idolatry, everything was being consumed, and because they were self-centered and all these things, so it wasn't flowing out. So God said, "Fine, I'm going to stop pouring into you at all."
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, in some ways, praying for the peace of Jerusalem or Israel, praying for the peace of Palestinians, like praying for the peace in America, there is a reality that I think holds true biblically, that the more Israel is at peace, the more we will be at peace.
Yeah.
So the more Israel is at peace, the more Palestine will be at peace. And again, that's peace with God.
Yes.
First and foremost, not peace with themselves, And when Israel becomes conceited or self-centered, or Israel tries to take territory they're not supposed to, or to do things they're not supposed to, and then the blessing's gone for everybody,
Yeah.
So I think that is an interesting
thing.
thing.
And the problem is that we, it's not a problem. It's not a conflict that can be secularized.
Yeah.
So we try to, I think in America, we try to secularize everything. Like, okay, well, if you could just have two states and maybe you can get that area, and then you could live next to each other and maybe that'll work. But what they're removing from it is the thing that is fueling it, which is religion, and you can't remove it from that. It's like it makes it so we get so torn in America because we're like we're so used to just going, keep God out of government, and then we'll just like talk about this on a secular playing field. But the Middle East can never really sit like that, and you've got Israel and their response, which I feel like there is some problematic things with that for sure.
Yeah.
Then you've got Hamas, who says like we exist to destroy Israel, and you're like, well, then how do you live at peace with that? And
Totally.
So there's real tension that cannot be resolved with just let's talk about it better. And this is where, as Christians, we do have the answer, though it's not popular. And the answer is Jesus. The answer is, if you turn to Jesus, you will find yourself loving your neighbor and loving people who don't think like you. And not that Christians are perfect by any means, but it is that river of blessing that eventually flows from the people of Israel down through the lineage of David to Jesus, who eventually brings in the peace that is needed. Yeah. And I think when we're looking at the situation I think that's where Americans get so frustrated. We're trying to secularize it, go, why don't you guys just get along? But we're removing all religious mindset from it. When you're in the Middle East, that's not how they think. They're not secularist first. There's a religious component to everything that's happening. So it creates a real cognitive dissonance for us. We're like trying to make it make sense, but we come at it from a very different perspective.
Well, so many attempts from outside entities to try and broker a deal. Yeah. None of them are working.
Oh, I remember Clinton sitting down like, we signed it. We did it,
Well, even recently, they're just attempt after attempt. I think Jordan tried. I think, Russia supposedly has tried, and U.S. has tried, and China's tried. All these people have tried. Yeah. And, but it's deep-rooted. And I think as Christians, we know that it's not just rational, like you said. It's not just secular. There's a spiritual reality. There's a spirit of dissonance or dissension or division and hatred that is there that we have to pray against. But
well, and to your point, like the world secularizing these issues is like pretty new, and like the history, like books of just like you had just said it, right? Like it's this religious thing, but like just centuries and centuries, like all of history, this one piece of land has been battled over, you know?
It has,
And like the recent events in October and everything actually sent me, like, I learned a lot about the history of like this area and stuff like that. And, understanding that Muslim nations have basically, like, there was no separation of religion and state.
Yeah.
So like when we talk about the secular, like from that angle, like it's removing that. And I think that's exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
So I might be redundant
it's a completely
in saying that,
different
but
mindset.
Like now hindsight, we're like, oh, there is a secular answer, but there's centuries of religious tension that have been built up.
Just the very fact that right now, today, that Temple Mount in Jerusalem it's the most important thing in all of Israel history is that section of land,
right.
and there's a mosque right on the top of it.
Where
Solomon's
it was torn
temple
down
used to
and they
sit.
built a mosque.
So
on top.
every day they wake up and they walk around the city, and they're in the most important place to them. Not the most important place to Islam, like Mecca is all that.
It's the third most important place to them.
The most important place to the people of Israel. There's a mosque, a real Golden Dome mosque on there. So that's a challenge. But then the reality of Hamas and kind of the influence that they've had, and again we understand that not every Palestinian is pro Hamas or all of those things, but the warring factions right now attacked Israel not because Israel was like doing something to hurt them necessarily. Now, I know there's affluence in Israel and there's not, so there's those challenges. But the main motivation for the attacks is because Israel exists.
Yes,
it's not even if they did nice things, there's still a problem because they exist.
Yeah,
and so when you have those two realities, those are such core challenges. That something
or
has
even
to give
how
in
many
those
two-state
realities.
solutions actually, like how many times there was a solution put forward that Hamas said no to, and because ultimately they're like, we're not looking for a part of the land, we want all of it. So again we're trying to rationalize it, or even I even find myself even saying that, like, ooh, careful, don't say that, you know. But it is absolutely the reality, and so it's again we're trying to secularize it, but it doesn't make sense. And I think then on the other side, we have to understand there's nothing the enemy would love to do more than to prove God wrong and to destroy all Jewish people. Like there's that question, like I was listening to an interview and they were like, well, why is there so much anti-Semitism rising right now? And they said, well, because Israel is like basically destroying Palestine. And they said, well, what about in the 1930s? Why did that happen? We weren't doing anything. Like, why then? And what about at this point? What about this point? And really, you can't point to anything. Again, it makes absolutely no sense in a purely secularized mindset. Yeah. It just doesn't make sense. Why would you want to kill Jews? But if there is an enemy who would love to destroy the people that God said, I have blessed you to be a blessing, and the enemy is like, how about I just destroy all of them? In that realm, in that understanding, that to me goes, oh, that helps me to see this a lot clearer. Yeah. But it's so difficult in the kind of contemporary American mindset. And as old as this conflict is, politically, it is kind of a new thing. Because Israel actually is a nation again. So there is this sort of newness to it in the 1940s. And I agree with Dalton for the most part. There was a lot of tension in that land, even between Muslims, the Sunni, Shia. There was a lot of stuff going on there. But in the 1940s, this new thing arose, which is the country of Israel and the nation of Israel. And now we're kind of going, oh, wow, this is now the focal point of anybody's hatred that hasn't made sense. It's now focused on that, Yeah. And again, I think all it should do is remind us it's easy to get caught up into infighting, especially among Christians. It's easy to get caught up in going, careful, you didn't say this thing and you didn't round it out with this perspective and you didn't say this. But I think the most important thing for us to remember is that our battle's not against flesh and blood. There is a real enemy that really tries to use things in geopolitics to that the things in the spiritual realm affect what happens in the physical.
And powers, totally. They're at work and they've been doing damage for a long time. Yeah. Not just maybe one last thing on that. The idea, like you were saying, 1948 being such a significant thing in the hearts and the minds of the Israeli or people of Israel. I mean, it was 70 AD when Rome completely destroyed it. Yeah. And then for almost 1800 years, they didn't have a homeland. That's amazing. And then they do. Yeah. I mean, it's
and even when King Cyrus said go back, it wasn't their nation anymore. Like they were able to freely be back, It was like, and so they were occupying it, but they were like, they weren't, it wasn't that full, like they're a nation again. Like it says in Ezekiel, like there'll be one, they won't be split anymore. And it's so hard to imagine how many years went by that by the time, 1911 rolls around, of course you would say, how on earth would they be a nation again? Number one, why would they speak Hebrew again? That's just insane. It hasn't been that way for thousands of years, at this point. Well, maybe not quite thousands, but thousands. At that point, like it's been a long, long time. It would not make any sense at all. And even Christians, and they're like, well, I don't know, maybe it just represents the church. It brought all sorts of interesting dynamic in there. And then all of a sudden, there it is, And I think for us, to me, I mean, especially when I brought that up, my main point was this. It's not again, Israel's perfect and everybody else is terrible. What it is, it's just a reminder of the promises of God and how long he'll wait. He was true to his word and it didn't make any sense that it would come back around, but here it is. And we get to stand today going, okay, well, when God promises something, it's going to happen. There is nobody else in the world that we know is as true to their word as God is.
And we can rest in his promise, whether we're in a season of captivity or not. And we can also remember that we need to be real responsible. The fear of the Lord is a real important thing. Yeah. And Israel lost that, which kind of drove them into captivity. And so we have, even in America, we've been given a lot of resource and responsibility. And we need to steward that well, to not realize it's not just to build up us alone, but we should kind of balance that with, caring for the people that we have, but also trying to be a blessing to the nation. Yeah. I mean, that's what God wanted for the people of Israel and still today wants that for the people of Israel. And it is hard right now when Israel is using the power and strength that they have to bring, such horror and death and all of those things. Can war be justified? It's a whole nother topic, whatever. But I want to move us into the hand of the Lord concept.
Can I say one quick thing before I say that? I will say this. I think, when you look at like Benjamin Netanyahu, he's a politician. And I think this is one of those things where, again, maybe on the other side, where he starts kind of going, okay, we're gonna fight back and we're gonna execute justice ourselves. Yeah. And the enemy also loves that. The enemy's like, great, let's just, steal, kill, destroy wherever we
fire
can.
With fire. Yeah. It's all going to burn.
And again, it's this sort of, the main fallacy there and the main thing that we've always learned when you have a biblical mindset is justice is the Lord's. And so whenever humans take justice in their own hands, it may even start in a good place, but it never ends in a good place. And so this is one of the warnings of, hey, be careful. Like, I understand Hamas exists to destroy you. I understand they did some horrible, horrible things. I can even understand trying to get in there and root out Hamas. But when you cross that line, the enemy is like, great, let's stir this up even more. Yeah. And I think and it spills out into our personal lives too. Whenever we take justice into our own hands, it doesn't work out well.
Yeah, we have to be careful. I mean, our nation, after 9/11, we just started bombing, you know, whoever we could think of bombing, and we got into a lot of things that might have been overreach or across the line in some ways as well. But it's hard when
seemed right at first.
Yeah, it's hard when you're feeling that. But that's why we need the wisdom of the Lord so much in those things. And we need the hand of the Lord upon us.
There it is. Transition.
So, a little transition. So I just want to spend a little time like that. I mean, I was thinking for me personally, okay, where are the moments in my life where I felt like the hand of the Lord was upon me? And there's been a couple, actually, before I moved to Phoenix. So I'm 23 years old. I've graduated college. I've spent some time in Northern Ireland working at the Guinness Brewery. Mm-hmm. I'm back in Oregon. I'm just basically trying to find a job, and I'm just like closed door. And Mark Buckley, the pastor of Living Stream, says, "Hey, would you be willing to come work with our youth? We would love to have that." And I was like, Oregon's seeming pretty good right now. And it was so funny because just day after day, I just felt this squeeze happening. And in some ways, I would say it almost felt like maybe the beginnings of depression, where I just was so unsatisfied. I wasn't enjoying anything. Everything was going numb. I was trying to do all these things, trying to get excited about things, couldn't get excited about anything. And I just remember waking up each day just going, I don't know what to do. I don't know what is happening. And I look back at it now and I feel like the Lord was basically just kind of squishing me, saying, hey, I'm just going to be heavy, heavy, heavy on you until you make this move. Because he wanted me to move to Phoenix and I didn't want to. So when I finally decided, hey, I don't know what else to do, I think I'm going to move to Phoenix. It was so interesting how it was just, this kind of flood of excitement, this lightness, like all the heaviness was just gone. And Arizona still didn't sound that good to me. It wasn't like any detail changed. It was like my heart decided to go the direction that the Lord was pushing. And all of a sudden it wasn't Balaam's donkey standing against me. It was like, now I'm in line with the lightness, with the glory of God. And there's that verse in Isaiah, it says, go out with joy and be led with peace. And it's just so funny because I didn't have that joy and peace until I took, that first step, or at least set my face to go in that direction. Yeah. And boom. So the hand of the Lord, it was like this conviction. It was my stubbornness versus his stubbornness is sort of what it felt like. Yeah. And then when I surrendered, I didn't get more heaviness. I got this lightness,
Yeah. Well, and I think that is interesting because a lot of times we use the hand of the Lord as like an anointing of the Lord, which it can be, but sometimes it's just weighty, And I think I told the story last time I was preaching. I've told this a couple times. This is, I think, the second time I've told the story, but this is the first time I ever shared that it was my grandma. But like the night the Lord was like, I need you to go tell her about Jesus tomorrow. And I honestly, at this point, I had stopped praying for her because I was like, I can't imagine somebody who's rejected me as many times, rejected the Lord. And maybe there's a little psychology coming through right there, but rejected that presentation of the Lord to my grandma so many times, like in a snarky, hard-hearted, there's no way any of that's getting even 10% into me, And that night, it was so funny. Sometimes I'll do this, and it was like the Lord's like, I need you to do this, and I'm like, no, I'm just not going to. Like I knew God was like, I want you to do this thing, and I'm like, I'm just not going to. And then the weight fell on me, and I still remember I was laying in my old bedroom because I was staying at my parents' house, and Blake and the kids were up here. I just ran down to Tucson just in case this was kind of it for her. And I was alone, and I just couldn't escape it. I was going, I know what I have to do tomorrow. Yeah. And it was so funny. It was I'm like, I need support then, Lord. And so I text my sister. I was like, can you meet me? And my sister, I love Lisa. She's awesome. And she was just like, no problem. When do you want me there? Wow. And so that feeling of, and then what's funny is as I was waiting outside that hospital, waiting for Lisa, we were meeting there together. I don't think I've ever felt as like nervous as I had then, you know? And I think back on like an outcry night, you know, in DC, we were speaking for like 20,000 people, you know, I was way more nervous alone at 6:45 a.m. outside of this, you know, than I was ever nervous before, you know? And so I went in and I didn't feel like telling her about the Lord. And even as I sat there, I was like, I'll small talk a bit before I get there and we'll see. And it was so funny because even my sister, I realized later she was there for support, but eventually she was there for accountability. And I didn't realize that until she was like looking at me like, hey, I thought this is what we're here for. You said. And so then when it happened, it was like, oh man. And then I said, do you want to accept Jesus? She said, yeah. And I was like, that was so easy. Like I almost didn't believe her. I was like, are you sure? You know? But it was that, just like you said, that release. It was like the hand of the Lord was on me and I was squirming and I didn't want to do it. It was like a Jonah situation. Yeah. And then eventually it was like, okay, I did the thing and it worked. Like there was fruit from it. And then the lightness came, and my sister said later, she was like, man, I just felt the Holy Spirit so strong in there, you know? And I think, you know, there's many times you and I have talked about like, preaching is one of those where I feel like most of the time you feel kind of the favor of the Lord where you're like, I'm just bringing what I've got and I hope, Lord, you make something of it. And we all know our week and we all know the afternoons we were like, we're going to work on the sermon and then something came up or like, and then so you walk in there knowing all those imperfections or all those places where you could have polished it better or tightened the screws more. And then you're like,
or you could have just had AI write it for you and it would have been way better.
Chat GPT, But you walk in, you're like, this is all I got. And then the Lord does something with it and it's really beautiful. And that's like the anointing of the Lord. That's where you feel like there's wind at your back, you know. But sometimes that hand of the Lord is just weighty. Just like, and especially when you're in that Jonah situation where you're going, I know what you want me to do, but I'm just not going to do it. That weight gets pretty intense.
That's cool. Yeah. I think that the lightness, I mean, obviously, you know, the hand of the Lord that showed up in Babylon with Belshazzar, who was the king, and it wrote the handwriting on the wall, right? That whole story. That's a hand of judgment. You know, you've been weighed in the balance and found wanting, and tonight your kingdom is going to be given to the Medes and the Persians. And so I was thinking about that. Like, there's the hand showing up for Ezekiel. It's like the hand of the Lord is not short; He can reach us. You know, and that's you know, an affront to the deistic type idea that God kind of made the universe and then He's hands off. But in the Bible, He's very hands on. And the idea that His hands are on things, He's guiding things. But that picture was so strong to me of the hand of the Lord will continue to push down on you, push down on you, push down on you when He's calling you to something. So Ezekiel, you've been called as a priest. That's not gone. You're in a foreign land. You don't have a temple, but you're still called to do this. Like the calling is sure. But the thing that seems to happen is if you resist long enough, the Lord doesn't smash you. Which you would think. It's like he's just getting heavier and heavier and heavier. But two things will happen. Is one, you'll release, you'll surrender, and you'll feel that lightness come. So it's not that the Lord takes His hand off of you, but now you see that His hand is actually it's a blessing. It's strength. Like Jesus said, "Come to me, take my yoke upon you, and find out how light it is." Right? Find out how easy. It's like you're taking more on, but now all of a sudden it's light. And so that hand coming down, but the hand doesn't eventually squish you. The hand eventually will just lift off of you. And so that's what it was. Belshazzar, my hand has been on you to be king of Babylon. But because you've continually rejected me, I'm lifting my hand from you, and the gates of hell are free to take over. And in Israel, that's what it was his hand was on the temple, and He was showing Ezekiel, hey, I'm done. The idol that causes jealousy, they're driving me far from it. I'm lifting my hand. And shortly what happened? The Babylonians completely destroyed the whole temple and basically broke the heart of Israelites for, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years until, well, maybe 100 years or so as they rebuilt the temple. But
Well, it's like that hand of the Lord is like, and you could kind of picture it as like, or when Jesus was like, you're kicking against the goads.
Yeah.
It's like this hand is pushing you. And if you're just listening, I'm sorry, you're not seeing my hand gestures, but like the hand is pushing. And if you're pushing back on it, you'll feel weight. And you're like, is it the weight of the Lord, or is it, am I putting my weight against the Lord, you know? Right. But the fact that the weight is there is a good thing, because the Lord's trying to push you into something.
It means he's still there.
Yes. And then if you turn around, now it's pushing you toward that thing, and you got that strength behind you. Yeah. But it's almost like, you know, they say in marriage counseling, when you stop fighting for the marriage is actually like the worst part of the marriage that's about to fall apart. Yeah. When you stop fighting, you don't care anymore, you know? And I think and sometimes it's good. It's good for maybe couples out there like, man, I'm arguing with my wife. Well, and within reason, but sometimes that tension, like you're coming to the table going, like if your tension especially is in an area of like, man, I wish like, I'm not feeling very loved by you in this area or something, and that there's tension there. That's a good tension. That means you're both trying to come to the table. You still care, you know? And I think it's that weight of the Lord pushing. But when you've pushed so hard and you've said no enough, the Lord's like, all right, I'm going to back off. Yep. And that is a scarier place to be, because you don't have the Lord with you. Yeah. And now you're just floating and you don't care and you're not feeling the pressure anymore. And like, I think to me that is and it's a loving move of the Lord going, hey, I'm not gonna keep, you're the one pushing against my hand. It's hurting you a lot. I'm just going to like let this thing go. But as soon as you feel that hand back on you, you like, as soon as the hand lifts, you miss out on the opportunity to surrender to the Lord and feel him push you into something really beautiful, you know? Yeah.
Conviction is kind of the word, I think, that conviction is something you don't like, but it actually is such a sweet, sweet gift.
Oh yeah.
That we would, and it's beyond conscience. It's not just conscience. It's beyond that. Conscience is a little bit more of a natural, we know the consequences of things, so our conscience leads us in that way. Yeah. But the Spirit of God it brings that conviction, which either drives us to something, like you're with your grandma. The conviction was, you need to do this. Yeah. Or the conviction is, you don't do that, or you shouldn't have done that.
Yes,
you know? And now you need to make things right. Yeah. But that's such a blessing. That's such a gift. That's such a wonderful thing. That should be something that, as believers, we rejoice when the conviction of the Lord comes, when the hand of the Lord is upon us. Yeah. Even though it might not feel good at first, it ultimately will give us that release.
It always leads somewhere beautiful, though. And I think like you could look back on. I could think back on times where conviction was coming on something I did. And then it's like, okay, I'm convicted to move forward in confession or whatever. Yeah. And it always works out way better than I thought it would. Yeah. You know, always like, oh, wow.
The lightness. You think it's so heavy, but you find
and somebody's
lightness.
Response in some ways too. It's like, wow, I didn't, like, Lord, you were so good to meet me in that conviction, and then like faithful to meet me there. And I think I've always heard, I can't remember, somebody said this, and I keep saying it. I just think it's a great phrase, but it's like the difference between conviction and condemnation. Yep. And conviction, there's always a hope that I could change, or there's something that can shift. Yeah. Condemnation is like nothing will ever change. And that's that like, you've given yourself over to hopelessness. Yeah. You've given yourself over to, it'll never work out, you know? Yeah. And conviction is not that. Conviction is okay, Lord, I'm feeling a feeling about a thing I did or a thing I should be doing, and it won't lift until I do that thing or deal with that thing. And that's a blessing. It's a good thing. It's like, okay, but I know on the other side there's going to be something really good, you know?
Yeah, so that's our little encouragement today to you out there. I mean, we all have different lives, different decisions we're making every day, but we have the same God who acts the same, and the way he acts with one person is the way he acts with other people. The way he acts with Israel is the way he'll act with all the nations. That's the whole point of it. And so if you're feeling the hand of the Lord upon you, or maybe you did feel the hand of the Lord upon you, and you've kind of been trying to ignore it or fight it, just want to encourage you to lean into that. Yeah. And what we've experienced, what we see in the scriptures, and not 100%, but usually it ends up in lightness, quicker than you think. Yeah. Sometimes it might take some time, but lean into that, and you don't want to lose the hand of the Lord upon you.
No,
I don't. We need it so badly.
Yeah.
And what we do need is, as nation, is the nation Israel, Palestine, America. We need to humble ourselves before the mighty hand of the Lord, and reinstate the fear of the Lord. Not that we're just kind of like cowering, thinking he's going to smash us, but the fear that we could disappoint, or we could grieve, or we could diminish his influence and his presence in our nation, or in our family, or in our lives. We don't want to do anything. And I think that's what was beautiful about David, a man after God's own heart. Didn't mean he did everything right.
Yeah.
But when he was wrong, he was quick to repent. He was quick to turn. He was quick to come back to the Lord. And I think that's really what it meant, that he was chasing God's heart. And so that's our little encouragement for you today. Yeah. Any final words, Dalton and Ryan?
No, I don't want to talk anymore.
I don't want to waste on that. That seems like such a great place to land.
It is VBS week for us here.
It is VBS week.
Living Streams, and Ryan is your Pierre, right?
Pierre, yeah.
He's an underwater inventor.
French inventor. And man, a French accent is not compatible with me. I could do the surfer dude, no problem. I could do the rocker dude. Yeah, I could do all that. Man, French accent, I thought it was going to be easy. It turns into a German accent super fast.
The best part of today was when you were judging it was Crazy Hair Day.
Yeah.
So we bring kids on stage. We're like, oh, who has the craziest hair out of the classes of kids, right? And the kids, go wild and everything. But you had just done the first group and you didn't know where to send them. So you're in the French accent, oh, oui, oui.
Oh, oui, oui, monsieur.
Yeah. And you're and then you go, oh, go that. And then you look over at your wife who's running everything.
Yes,
Blake, and you go from the French accent, oh, oui, oui. Blake, where do you want the kids to go? Do you want them to go down?
I went to straight American accent, and I even knew in the moment. So let me explain my thought process. What I was thinking is Blake will not understand if I try to do this too French-like. I need to just be clear because we got a lot of kids. Yeah. But I did. In my mind, I was like, that's
and then
so
bounced
funny.
right back into it.
Yeah, I just bounced right back in.
Yeah, no, you did. You did. I lost my mind. That was the
my
funniest thing ever.
Hanging on because I'm in the rec room with them and doing games and shouting. And, hey, go there, do this, do that. So I could feel my voice just getting so small today.
I know. But I think it's that I'm choosing a real gravelly sort of French accent,
Yeah.
And it's when I'm done, my throat hurts grinding. So bad. I'm just grinding on my throat.
Well, but we are so thankful that you're tuning in. We hope there was something edifying, building
especially
up.
In the last 30 seconds. Yeah, something really good out of that.
Something interesting for you. Thank you so much for all the comments that we get in passing at church about, hey, the podcast's been great. It's been helpful. That's wonderful. If you want to subscribe, share. I don't know what else the cool kids are doing these days, but
Dalton will tell us.
But you can do all of
Dalton's
that.
You said
I have no idea. You say
this
whatever
Sunday,
you want.
Happy Father's Day to all those out there. If you're listening to us before Father's Day, hope you had Happy Father's Day. If you're listening to it after Father's Day,
maybe you're listening to it on Father's Day. I don't know. Maybe you like this sort of thing.
And we'll catch you next time.